All right, welcome everybody. A lot of familiar faces out there this evening. We will now commence with the City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commission regular meeting for August 17th, 2023. Yasmin, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Can you please do a roll call?
Of course. Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Cohen is absent. Commissioner Ford? Absent. Commissioner McCray?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson? Here. Commissioner Stanwyck?
Here.
Chair Stedman?
Here. All right, thank you very much. It's flawless. So are there any changes to the agenda, Director Wiltshire?
No changes, Chair Stedman, but just did want to take 1 second and introduce a new face in the room.
Yep.
Yasmin Dominguez is our new admin assistant. So she's also, along with her other duties, she will be clerking Harbor Commission from now on. So she's got a lot of experience. She came to us from the city clerk's office, so she's very familiar in council chambers.
I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. All right, are there any general public comment slips?
For remote public comment, to indicate that you would like to make a remote public comment, please click the raise your hand icon on the control panel. Currently, there are no in-person speaker slips, and there are no remote speakers.
All righty, let's move right along to Vice Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Chair Stedman. Yeah, the Harbor Commission did not meet in July, and I don't believe any subcommittees or work groups did meet. Would any other commissioner like to speak on any of the work groups or subcommittees? Okay, I think we're good with there. We'll move on to the consent calendar.
Very well. Well, let's move to item 1. Can you read that, please?
Item 1, approval of the minutes. Recommendation, the Harbor Commission waive further reading and approve the minutes from the regular meeting of June 15th, 2023.
All right. Do we have a motion? So moved. So seconded.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen? Absent. Commissioner McCray?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanowick?
Yes.
Chair Stedman?
Yes.
Motion is unanimous.
Very well. Let's move on to new business. Can you read item number 2, please?
Item 2, Waterfront Department Fiscal Year 2023 Preliminary Budget Review. Recommendation, that Harbor Commission receive a staff report providing a brief summary of the Waterfront Department's preliminary revenues and expenditures as of June 30th, 2023, and provide comments as appropriate.
Good evening, Chair Stedman, Commissioners, and members of the public. My name is Cesar Barrios. I am the Waterfront Department's business manager, and today I will have an update on our fiscal year 23 budget. So here's our revenue summaries of fiscal year 2023. On the left, there are various revenue components or divisions, and then the 23 budget on the next column. What we actually took in, whether it was over or under the budget, percentage variance, and then the last column on the right shows actuals for fiscal year 2022 as comparison. Big picture, we came in about 10% over the budget estimates, just over $1.7 million. We really tapped down all of our revenue projections as for year 2023, and we did the same for our expenditures. Here you see our overall revenues. They were $2.3 million above the fiscal year 2023 budget. Just going down the line here, commercial leases were up over 16% compared to the budgeted amounts. All non-restaurant leases, including Blue Water Hunter, Deep Sea Winery, Old Wharf Trading Company, et cetera, are within that category. In the food service, we were up over 16% compared to the budgeted amounts. The food service industry continues to rebound from the pandemic. However, it's worth pointing out that this past winter season, it was very difficult for many of our tenants with consistent rain and storms we had from December all the way almost to March. For visitor fees, we're up 2%, nearly $14,000, a nominal increase, but we attribute this to the winter storms and the consistent rain, again, during the winter, fall months. Moving on to sleep permit transfer fees, a total of 28 transfers took place, resulting in $29,675 in sleep transfer fee revenue. That's a 3% increase over the budgeted amounts. Continuing on with our programs, overall parking revenues were up 12% or nearly $390,000 versus the budgeted amounts. Parking revenues are a function of the weather. So as mentioned previously, we saw an impact from the storms in the winter, significantly affecting our parking revenues, but overall we did fairly well the other months. And other fees and charges are down 4%, but this includes the skiff tie-ups, fish hoist, and the wharf dockage. And again, a lot of this is a function of the weather. In our investment income, it's up 109% or $122,411. This is due to more reserves, less expenditures, and the better interest rates that we've seen over the last year. And we have little control over this. It's more of a reporting tool. Then with rents and concessions, they're up 3%, which include lease revenues from the Yacht Club, UCSB Sailing, the NOAA office, as well as the Santa Barbara Sailing Club. In miscellaneous, excuse me. My slide. Thank you. In miscellaneous, which includes revenues from cruise ships, room rentals, film permits, late fees, among others, the revenues are up by $134,470 versus the budgeted amounts. Also, these revenues have increased, and they've been consistent with the return of the cruise ships, which was very consistent this past season. As you may recall, last year we had several cancellations, which affected the budget. And also, we had an increase in the photo and film permits, which it falls within the category. Okay, so moving on to the expenditure summary. We had another good year in savings. Overall, expenditures of just over $18 million equals to 93% of the annual budget through the end of the fiscal year. All expenditure categories were at or below the budgeted amounts. Big picture, salaries and benefits finish 5% below budget for the fiscal year, thus $413,674. Some positions remained vacant, such as the waterfront administrative analyst position, as well as the numerous hourly and facilities positions, mostly hourly, which has been challenging for staff overall to keep positions filled within those categories. Moving on to materials and supplies and services, we ended the year 9% below the budgeted amounts. These savings were the result of careful planning and the cost-cutting measures that we adopted during the pandemic. In special projects, expenditures were down nearly $90,000, primarily due to the fact that there are encumbered payments to the commercial fishermen of Santa Barbara for grant matching, as well as carryover savings from previous year's fireworks displays. The department only expended $2,513 in appropriated reserves to pay our fiscal agent. No other expenses were incurred during the fiscal year on this item. Also, please note that expenses related to the damage caused by the January storms and then up to $2.5 million are not reflected here. Those costs are sitting in an account the finance department allocated for FEMA costs and reimbursement. So if FEMA does eventually reimburse us, which could take several years, then it will be paid out of into that account. If for reasons we do not get reimbursed, then we'll have to pay that current fund from our reserves. So we're hoping that FEMA will be able to cover the majority of this cost. Overall expenditures were down 7%, or $1,335,060 below the fiscal year budget. Salaries and benefits finished $471,674 below the budgeted fiscal year. And again, I just briefly went over this in the previous slide, but it's important to point it out since these items are standing out. So as material supplies and services ended up 9% below the budgeted amounts, significant savings. Overall, this item, and again, this primarily, we continue practices that we enacted during the pandemic, which they've been healthy for revenues and we're able to continue to do. In equipment, just over $97,000 in savings, and that encompasses computer equipment and software, as well as budgeted amounts that were allocated to the programs like parking services, harbor patrol, and facilities that were not spent. So we allocate an X amount of dollars for equipment expenses, and we saw some savings this year. Again, the revenue for the department, there- Okay. Thank you. Again, the revenue for the department was $17,036,131 for fiscal year 2023. This is 1.7 million above the budgeted revenue amounts. The last bullet shows the difference in actual revenue from fiscal year 2022 and 23. This year coming in at 4.8% higher than we did last year for revenues. So let's take a minute to provide some high-level context with respect to our budget. We had a positive fiscal year 2023. Here are some key factors that attributed to the successful revenue and expenditure picture from a budget point of view. Revenue estimates were made over just a year and a half ago, and we're very conservative. And we continue to be somewhat aggressive in our savings just to ensure that we are able to replenish our reserves and maintain our operations. We held some vacancies towards the beginning of the year. We had some turnover, so we have vacant positions for approximately 6 months out of the year for the certain positions, and then we reduced spending in supplies and services. Overall, we continue to see stronger than expected economic performance. And again, the waterfront, it's a function of the weather. So again, I reiterate that we had significant impacts the third quarter with the storms. That said, going forward, we continue to be cautiously optimistic. For future budget years, we need to be realistic and conservative. And we're still trying to get back to pre-COVID expenditure and service levels. We resume spending on deferred maintenance and rebuilding our reserves to pre-COVID levels. So, and overall, just to remind everyone that's understands the waterfront, that we are an enterprise fund with no help from taxpayer money or the general fund. We're self-funded, so we're responsible for ensuring we're solvent during tough times. And here's some perspective I wanted to provide. For perspective, I wanted to provide the fiscal year 24 budget as at a high level point. This is our current budget. So the pie chart on the left shows our revenues, and the pie chart on the right shows our expenditures. And again, the intent is not to get into this in too much detail, but it's to show the fact that in fiscal year 2024, we budgeted $18.9 million in revenues and $19.7 million in expenditures. So we budgeted a planned deficit of $800,000. So this is very important to show as we rely on surpluses like the one we had in fiscal year 2023 to float our capital projects in any given year. In fiscal year 24, we are planning to use at least $800,000 of reserves or surplus from the previous year to fund our operation. This leaves a lot to chance. It would be nice as an operation to increase our revenue and fully fund our operating costs and our capital budget in years moving forward. As we continue to rely on surpluses from good years to fully fund our future year budgets. I hope this painted a bit of a better picture, and just to give you an idea how we rely on these sources of revenue. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Vice Chair?
Yes, thanks for the presentation, Mr. Barrios. I have a question regarding the revenues and particularly the leases. I remember in 2020, there was a rent deferral program due to the pandemic that the waterfront had going on. Do we still have any tenants on that program, or has that been phased out?
Commissioner Stanwyck, we do have, I believe we have two tenants, and Mr. Borchard can add to that section. haven't been directly involved with that process, but I know we have two, I believe we have two tenants.
Yeah, Commissioner Stanwyck, it's a very small amount, like we're
Okay.
talking 90+% have kind of
Oh, really?
paid
Okay.
back and moved on, and so it is a very small amount remaining, if any. So we can get that number for you and get back to you, though.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.
Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit on the kind of the trade-off and interplay between those deferred capital projects and some of the maintenance going on and it hasn't gone on. And the consideration of whether or not we might be reimbursed for the outlay that we had this last winter for that storm.
Commissioner McCray, yeah, there's always a chance that we may not be reimbursed from FEMA from those expenses. However, it appears we're in good standing, but again, it's not something that is guaranteed to us. I know right now the city as a whole is actively working to gather all the documentation and to ensure that we follow the process to the T to ensure that we get reimbursed. As far as your previous question, different projects, I believe we're getting back on track. There were some ancillary projects that were not significant, that were not essential to the functionality of the waterfront. Perhaps we continue to maintain the harbor and the wharf, which is essential infrastructure. Projects that could have been deferred, for example, could have been restroom remodels or enhancement of public spaces.
So we typically keep some supplies, and I think we worked into that kind of stock. I mean, potentially extra piles for Stearns Wharf, for example. I just wanted to get a sense of how aggressively we're planning to work back to, ground zero on those kinds of things, given the fact that we're not certain about reimbursement.
Yeah, Commissioner McCray, Commission, I can answer that one. We're essentially back to normal for our FY24 proposed budget. So we are proposing a full suite of capital projects as we would have pre-COVID. A lot of it comes down to how much work we can actually execute in a year. And so we need to kind of be strategic with which projects we do. I believe our capital program for this coming budget year is upwards of $1.5 to $2 million, which is kind of right in the range of what we would do in previous years. This past year's surplus was great. That's great news. It seems like a lot of money in a surplus, but it goes quickly when we have a capital program that's $1.5 to $2 million. So this year's surplus really helps us with a little bit of a buffer. As Mr. Barrios mentioned, the general fund is currently holding the debt from the FEMA project, and so our budget right now kind of appears as if that didn't happen. So the city is kind of consolidating all of that debt. A FEMA reimbursement would go to the city, and then that debt would be cleared. If that FEMA debt, those FEMA funds don't come to us, we will in turn owe that money back to the general fund essentially. But we're given, the good thing about that is we can kind of operate right now with a reasonably full set of reserves and a nice sized operating budget. And so we're going full bore on maintenance and capital as we would in previous years.
That's good to hear. I have one other thing. And the visitor fees, it's plus 2% in your presentation, and there's a spreadsheet in the materials we were provided where it shows visitors fees down 6.5%. I don't understand the difference in this table and that other presentation.
Commissioner McCray, let me backtrack to that table here.
And Commissioner, just to preface that, we were receiving numbers kind of right up. The city closes its books financially at the end of June, so July is the new fiscal year. It takes a month or two to get that all done, and so we've been sort of updating these numbers real time. That's a big enough discrepancy that it might have just been a clerical error, but the numbers in this table that is being presented are the most accurate from what I understand.
Yes, yeah, the numbers continue to change. So I'm looking at this table, we have 2% for visitor fees, and then as I go back, so you're referring to these two tables or the report that you received prior to the meeting last week?
It could be, it was like $53,000 or something like that that was involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be happy to look into that and follow up with you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was on your preliminary 8/7/2023 table. That's what Merritt's referring to.
If it was in the $50,000 range, it might have been a different pot. I don't know, maybe commercial fishing visitor vessels, because that's a smaller amount. We saw roughly $750,000 in visitor fees, so that might have been, we can, not to get hung up on it now, we can clarify that after the meeting.
Commissioner Nelson?
We talk about being reimbursed by FEMA or not being reimbursed by FEMA and having to pay them. This good news to me looks like we could cover the costs, the majority of the cost we incurred to deal with the disaster. Isn't that right? I mean, if we've got, $1.7 million above, and we had $2 million in disaster, and for some reason FEMA doesn't come through, it looks like we're in good position to cover it, because we've already sort of deferred expenditures on capital program, et cetera. So where we are right now is great. We can actually cover the majority of the disaster cost because of the strength of these revenues, right?
Yep. Commissioner, no, I appreciate the optimism. It is about even. We could and we would figure out how to cover it. But Mr. Barros did show in our next year's budget, we're budgeting about an $800,000 deficit to cover our program. So there's another shortage. So it would compound. It'd be tough to not get
Right,
that.
but I'm thinking based on the strength of these real-time actuals is what I would like to consider them. You've got your commerce, your food service, your parking revenues are way above budget. Way above budget. So I think this is really, really good news. And if anything, our budgets are too conservative, given that what this is showing us today. Is that not true? I mean,
Yeah, and to note, Commissioner Nelson,
16%, 30%, my gosh.
we made these budgets over a year or two ago, and all of us in this room agreed to budget our revenues conservatively
I know.
because we didn't know where to go. Admittedly, restaurants and industry did very well. We couldn't have predicted that a year ago. So you were right, we are in a great position. This is the best outcome. It's better than it being the other way around. But refilling our reserves is a priority, and not getting back that upwards of $2 million would hurt.
But I noticed that you didn't have to appropriate any more reserve. The pie chart that you showed at the end suggested no budgeting and no appropriated reserves for 2024 So.
That's correct. We were able to cover our capital program.
We're going to clean this disaster up this year.
We've already cleaned it up and
Right.
paid for
I mean,
it.
I just, to me, this is a lot better than I think we're making of it, and despite the bad weather, yeah, there was bad weather, but we killed it.
And Commissioner Nelson, just to add as well, we rely on surpluses to also just complete our standard capital improvements.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're in good shape overall, in considering the amounts in our reserves as well.
Okay.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner
Hey.
Anderson.
Hey, so just kind of on that theme, out of curiosity, this is on my second budget that we've been working through. How often do we forecast a deficit, and how often do we, or can you just give me a little background and color on historically deficits versus surpluses, and is this the general theme where we often forecast a deficit and move into a surplus?
Yeah, Commissioner, great question. Every year, historically, we budget a deficit. So we have never included our full capital, the full breadth of our capital program in our budget. So we've always relied on surpluses to fund our capital project. There was a graph, I don't have it handy right now, but in our budget presentation from FY23 that showed the last 10 years, and it kind of showed it, our revenues and expenditures oscillating and switching on the years on when we made more money than we spent, and some years when we spent more money than we made. 19 and 20, we spent more money than we made, so COVID, and so that was where we had budgeted deficit and we went into a deficit. FY, I believe it was 21 and 22, and we came out, we had clamped down really, really hard on expenditures, and revenues were pretty high. Everyone was boating, everyone was going to the beach. It was kind of this really silver lining of COVID. And so those years, we ran a big surplus. The nature of our business, it's really tough to predict. And so we try and be conservative with revenues, but really any given year, you look at being in this room today, what our revenues are going to be next year are just our best guess. We're really, really tied to economic uncertainty. So if people stop going out to restaurants, stop buying and selling boats, it really hurts what we do. It really hurts what we do. And so we kind of need that buffer to know that we can ebb and flow above and below any given year.
All right, doesn't look like there's any further questions from the commission. Any public hands raised? Yasmin?
There are no in-person speakers, and there are no remote speakers.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the department update.
All right, Chair Stedman, Commissioners, that's me. Mine will be fairly brief. So good evening to all those who tuned in and in the room. Again, I'm Mike Wiltshire, Waterfront Director. Next slide, Caesar. First news, long-time waterfront employee, a legendary waterfront employee. So Eric Engbretson, our Harbor Operations Manager, retired as of last week. So August 11th was his last day. Just want to commend him for everything he did for the waterfront and for the city. Eric was with the waterfront for 36 years. So he started as a maintenance diver at Stearns Wharf and spent the bulk of his career as a Harbor Patrol officer, but then worked his way up, Harbor Patrol supervisor, and then finally our Harbor Operations Manager. So just personally, a big thanks to Eric. When I came on board, he was always very open, very helpful. He taught me a lot about the way the harbor runs and everything sort of water facing and harbor patrol related. So just in huge debt to him for helping with all of that with me. We all obviously wish Eric the best and in his retirement, and he'll be missed, but I hope to see him down at the waterfront enjoying it from the other side of the coin soon. Just some practical stuff. So in the interim, Jeanette Przinski is going to be acting in his role for the next 2 months, followed by Nathan Aldridge. So they're going to share that duty. Thanks to the both of them. During this time, we're going to open a recruitment to fill the position permanently. So hopefully sometime in fall, winter, we'll kind of go through that process and fill this position permanently. Just again, both Nathan and Jeanette are here. Huge thanks to them. I know it's acting in a role is a lot. You still have your normal job and you're kind of taking on all these new duties. So it's a full plate for the both of you, and thanks for being willing to step up and cover. Next slide. I don't know if or when we've provided an update on this, but I thought it was a good time to do so. So the Santa Barbara Breakwater Flag Project, there was a recent addition to this project, and I'll get to that, but I thought it was worth bringing to the group's attention. I'm sure everybody knows of the flags along the breakwater. You either see them from the sea or from the land. It's kind of iconic and a big part of Santa Barbara Harbor. It's a joint effort between ourselves, the Waterfront Department, and the Yacht Club. So it was started in 2003, and the Yacht Club really manages the flags and the program and all the applicants, and the Waterfront Department handles the maintenance, repair, and replacement of the poles and rigging, so we kind of share in that effort. I believe there are 26 flags, including the U.S. flag at the end of the breakwater. Participants pay $825 a year, and that's really the exact cost of the flags. This is not a money-making endeavor. That gets 2 flags, cleaning, repairs. The Yacht Club takes them down during storms to protect them as best possible. And as of now, there's a 1 or 2 year wait list for local nonprofits or philanthropic groups to get their flags up on the breakwater. The most recent change or addition is there's now a QR code, that exact QR code right there on the screen, at the base of every pole. In my time at the waterfront, I've been asked at least a dozen times by people, what are all those flags and how do you know which is which? So now if you're at the base of any of those poles, you can scan it with your phone. It'll link you to the Yacht Club's website and kind of show you a detailed picture of each of the flags and who they represent. Yet historically, there wasn't any super readily available information or signage on what flags were posted at any given time, but now there's a kind of quick and easy way to find that out. Next slide. As I've done in the past, just kind of want to do a little bit of forward looking, so touch on some of the higher level items that we have coming up, not only this year, but it'll probably bleed into future years. So at our September meeting, first and foremost, we'll be welcoming a new Harbor Commissioner. So Miss Kate Ford, this would have been her first meeting. She had a previously scheduled trip prior to joining the Harbor Commission. Myself and staff members met with her a few weeks ago, kind of gave her the rundown, gave her the binder, everything she needed to know about Harbor Commission and the meeting schedule and how to participate. So she seems really eager to get involved, and she'll be here in September, so we'll welcome her. We owe the Harbor Commission a presentation or discussion on business activity permit policy and what the work group's been up to. So the plan is for that to come back to the Harbor Commission in September. There's been a fair amount of work going on behind the scenes with the work group and staff on that. And aiming to bring a discussion of the cruise ship program back in September. Again, there's been some work going on behind the scenes on that. We do have a cruise ship subcommittee meeting next Tuesday at noon. An update on capital improvements, leasing and business discussion. I know we've been wanting to talk about vessel insurance policy for quite some time. Try and work that in, and then we've been trying to work to get a guest speaker, maybe somebody from the State Lands Commission. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just wanted it to be in the presentation. Are you going to go next slide? Just wanted it to be in the presentation. It's just sort of a cap. Everything in green is sort of what we've handled thus far, and everything is in red, which is really just 3 remaining meetings this year with some tentative items on those lists based on what we've been dealing with to date. And so I want to get in the habit of kind of tracking these and making them year to year so that we can have one in January that's forward looking and then kind of have one that's backward looking on what we actually accomplished. And so this is available in the PowerPoint or available if anybody needs it. With that, that's the end of my report. Any questions before I pass it over to Cesar Barrios?
Are there any questions? Commissioner Nelson?
Eric's recruitment, or the recruitment for Eric's position, is pretty damn important. Since I've been a commissioner, all of the top positions have been vacated. All good reasons, retirement, just moving on, better job, I get it. But nonetheless, you've had a complete turnover in terms of the key and top staff positions. And I recall very clearly Merritt discussing after we were dealing with the closure of the channel going into the harbor, how valuable the institutional knowledge that Eric provided. So I'm not to pry into the recruitment, but how are you going to structure that? I mean, I'm assuming that it won't be just for, Eric was law enforcement and LEO, but I'm assuming the recruitment will be for broader. And I guess what I'm looking at is, will you try to recruit an individual who has facility management experience, is a known problem solver, has been the forward face of a facility or a plan? Because I think it's really critical to the ongoing success of the operation. So if you could describe how you're going to fill the position and how it'll be structured, it'd be great.
Yeah, no problem, Commissioner Nelson. I'm happy to talk about that. The city itself has a pretty robust recruitment program and the way that all unfolds, especially for kind of management and above positions. So it's very likely that this will be an open recruitment. So what that means is it's available to city employees and anyone on the planet, really. We go through the job description, job duties prior to that posting recruitment. That's a task that mainly falls on myself and our HR department, kind of combing through that and seeing if it still mirrors what the actual job and what we require of it within the department. Once that's done, that hits the street. From there, we will go through a kind of an online application with a number of kind of qualifying questions to get reviewed not only by myself, but a panel from throughout the city of subject matter experts. So we'll select people from Public Works, hire folks, ask some other department directors. They'll review all of the applications with, that have come in and select all of those that are qualified. Myself and people from the waterfront department are typically not involved with that to sort of keep a layer of separation. And then those candidates who meet the qualifications and who are acceptable candidates will be forwarded to the department for in-person interviews.
My wife works for UCSB, and their process, I'm not recommending their process at all, but there's an aspect of their process which is pretty interesting. And one of the things they do when they get their first tier, or or tier of 5 or whatever that they want to consider seriously, they send these people out to talk to faculty and staff and those folks. And I guess I'm suggesting that there's an awful lot of experience sitting at this table. And if it were possible to structure the process in a way that we could actually, meet and greet the folks, it'd be a great thing. I kind of know the answer to that, but I know it's done. It's done literally down the road at UCSB, where the top candidates get interviewed widely by a diverse coterie, if you will, of evaluators. So just a thought.
Commissioner McCray?
Yes, I just want to take a moment to recognize Eric's great contribution into the continuity of that institutional knowledge. I think it was really important. And I would also like to recognize Jeanette. She is still here and holds a lot of that institutional knowledge. And I'd thirdly like to comment that I think there's been a nice overlap of people who have that long time experience and new people coming in, benefiting from that experience and learning firsthand. I mean, there was no better teaching moment than this last winter. So I think folks know. Thank you.
All right, I have a question. Director Wiltshire, while Jeanette and Nathan each fill the role temporarily, are they paid at the higher rate?
Commissioner Stedman, good question. They are. When you're in an acting role, you receive acting pay for the position that you're acting in. There's some nuance there on when it kicks in for different unions, but the answer is yes.
Great, well, congratulations. Get a little bump, both of you. All right, any other questions? And no comments, I presume. All right, let's move on to item number 4.
Good evening, Chair Stedman, Commissioners, members of the public. Again, my name is Cesar Barrios. I am the Waterfront Business Manager, and for my business report, I have 2 updates. One of them right now, it's the reserves policy. I'll basically provide you with an overview. I know this has been a significant topic of discussion over the last year, at least during the time that I've been here. So with that, first, to begin, as an introduction, I would like to say that sound financial management is an essential aspect of any local government's responsibility, and that's keeping our reserves. City financial reserves provide a buffer of funds to address unexpected emergencies or financial challenges that may arise in the future. So it's very important to be prepared. And the example is what happened just this past winter. Understanding the reserves policy, so a little bit of history. The council resolution 12066 established reserve policies for the general fund and enterprise reserves. This is for citywide. In essence, resolutions are segmented into different categories. And as listed right here, we have the contingency reserves, disaster reserves, the capital fund reserves, and specific to the waterfront department is the Harbor Preservation Fund. So just to go down the line, the contingency reserve is calculated based on the 10% of the most recently adopted fiscal year operating expenditure budget. The purpose of this reserve is to allow for the implementation of a balancing strategy to address the fiscal impacts of unexpected events in order to minimize the impacts for the city and the overall community. The most common of these events would be an economic recession that results in a significant impact on key revenues such as sales, transient occupancy tax, and property taxes. The general intent of the contingency reserve is for unexpected events or situations. In general, its purpose is not to fund known or anticipated financial impacts, such as negotiated salaries and benefits increases or schedule increases to the health insurance or premiums or retirement costs, perhaps. Then we have our disaster reserves, and the amount of the required disaster reserve is calculated based on 15% of the most recently adopted fiscal year operating expenditure budget. The disaster reserve is restricted to use in addressing the financial impacts of natural disasters, such as floods, wildfires, droughts, tsunamis, earthquakes, or any other event that results in significant damage to city facilities and infrastructure, or significant reduction of normal operating revenues. The use of these reserves require a majority vote of approval by the City Council. So for the Waterfront Enterprise Fund, we have the capital reserve requirement is met through reserves accumulated in the Harbor Preservation Fund, or HPF. I've highlighted this in red, as there are some changes being proposed for this fund. So pursuant to Chapter 1740 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, the Harbor Preservation Fund is required to maintain reserves of no less than $2 million with a goal of $5 million for preservation, enhancement, and management of waterfront state tidelands and trust properties. And furthermore, in history, this fund was established in 1980 to fund the cost of the new breakwater. And then it was amended again in 1998 following the wharf fire. So in general, this is to cover, it was created originally to cover expenses beyond the standard capital projects that we incur every year. So the capital fund reserve, this is a citywide policy. So currently each enterprise operating fund, excluding the waterfront department, has an established reserve, capital reserve, funded to at least 5% of the value of its capital assets, or the amount equal to the average of the planned capital program budgets for the upcoming 3 fiscal years. Capital fund reserves are intended to address an unexpected capital project or an unanticipated increase in capital projects. And again, to use these funds, it is required to obtain City Council approval. And here you have a current state of the waterfront reserves with a total of $5,639,906. And please let me note that the documentation that you received last week, it included a capital fund, but that was just an internal transfer that within our accounting process, it shows as being part of a capital reserve. but in fact, it's just a transfer within this funds. That's what I made the modification, which is different from what you saw, which it basically is, I eliminated the capital fund item that was listed in the previous table. But for the public, this is all in conjunction, it's all in sync with what we're saying today here. There are proposed reserve policy changes, and this is very recent. So during the city council hearing on June 7th of this year, the council directed the finance director to review resolution 22-126 pertaining to city reserve policies. Following a comprehensive review by the finance director at the July 25th finance committee meeting, the finance department recommended repealing Chapter 1740, which means completely eliminating the Harbor Preservation Fund to better be in line with how other enterprise funds manage these reserves. Moving forward, capital reserves will be funded by allocating the amount equal to the average of the planned capital programs budgets for the upcoming 3 years. So the benefit of this change is to have a waterfront capital fund to be efficiently managed and be better aligned with the overall city process from our financial process as a city. Pending city council approval, if it's Chapter 1740, which describes all the steps required for the Harbor Preservation Fund, this section will be removed completely from the resolution, and the positive aspect of this is that we will be able to not just follow a fixed number, which is what we're doing right now, which is between $2 and $5 million. This is an old policy that was enacted back in 1998, and things have changed quite a lot since then. So by following the standard process for enterprise funds, which is using the average of the future 3 years of capital projects, we'll be able to adjust our reserves based on the actual need and not just a fixed number that over the years will become smaller and smaller based on the need of the department. So to conclude, the Waterfront Department supports the Finance Director's request to remove all the language related to the Harbor Preservation Fund from the city's reserves resolution. These adjustments will move the waterfront away from a reserve target, and that is tied to a fixed dollar amount, as I previously mentioned. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions on the topic.
Commissioner McCray?
Yes, are you looking for support from us in this at all? Or is it just purely informational?
Commissioner McCray, purely information. This is it's a city internal process spearheaded by the finance department. The finance director has the authority over this, our reserves. We were consulted and internally, and we agree with the recommendation by the finance department. Director Wilshire may have
Yeah, no,
additional
that was
comments.
great. This is really just a cleanup. We're kind of this oddball enterprise fund who's not necessarily following city reserve policy to a T. So there's other enterprise funds, airport, water, wastewater, and they follow this model of having a capital reserve where it's a forward-looking average of the 3 years that you're going to spend. And it's come up a number of times in our budget presentation with council. There's some confusion over the Harbor Preservation Fund and what's for capital and why it's named that way and why it's tied to $2 million and $5 million. So tying to a fixed dollar amount is always kind of peculiar. So this was really just a cleanup from the finance department and council.
I have go ahead, Commissioner Nelson.
I know there was a disagreement between myself and the department at one time regarding how Tidelands trust funds could be spent. inside the footprint of the district or outside the district, but in the process, I was combing through the State Lands Commission's site and found the enabling statutes that conveyed the submerged lands to the city and the requirements that we had. And obviously, when I looked at that, I realized that every dollar or dime we make at the harbor has to be reported to the State Lands Commission. And in that language, there was all kinds of languages I don't understand, but it said things like, you know, excess revenues are determined at a certain level. And then those excess revenues, X can go to the city and X can go to the state. So it almost looked like there was a formula for distribution built into the statutes that conveyed the submerged lands to the city. And because I've dealt a couple of times with ports up and down the coast, I know one harbor that ran afoul of the guidelines of they spent Tidelands Trust monies inappropriately. And it happened in the finance department, not at the waterfront department level. So I'm assuming, I don't know if you're the one, Mike, that has to deal with the State Lands Commission and their requirements, or whether finance does, or is there any conversation between finance and state lands or state lands and yourself?
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson, it is myself and the department, so we send a financial report to the State Lands Commission every year. They ask for it, we send it.
Do you show them all these contingency funds and all this kind of stuff?
Yep, yeah, it's their form, so they kind of, it's a canned form. They ask for all the data from us. Where finance comes into play is we typically get a fair amount of data from them as well. So they request our citywide annual financial report. And so we kind of use finance to support us in that effort. But the request comes to us from State Lands and we answer it.
Okay, that's all.
Yes, Vice Chair?
Yes, I have a question. Regarding the revenue surplus from last year, how does that fit into the reserves going forward? Is that like added to the capital reserve? Just kind of wonder how that.
Yeah, Commissioner Stano, good question on reserves. So the way it goes, if you look at them as buckets, and so if we have revenues over expenditures, so a surplus in a previous given year, the first thing that goes to is funding our capital program of the next year. And so let's say we have $1 million surplus and $1 million capital program. We would fund that next year's capital program with that surplus, and nothing would happen to reserves because it was just neutral. It's obviously never balances that equally. And so we'll take our FY24 budget capital program, and if there's once we fund that capital program with that surplus, if there's any extra, it will go into our reserves. And if there is not any extra, then we'll draw from reserves to help fund that capital. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, thanks. And also, I noticed you guys put on that here, like the timeline for accessing those reserves. For those like emergency situations like pandemic or storm, how quickly, or like what is like the timeline for requesting that from City Council? Is that it would be probably pretty much for an emergency situation, so I'd imagine pretty quick, but how does that work through council?
Yeah, that's also a good question. And using this past storm as an example, it happened a little bit differently. So we spent money directly and immediately out of our capital program. So existing funds that we had, spendable dollars in our account. And then the city, once an emergency was declared, the city finance department took all of these requests to council to access reserves, to move that debt into a general fund account and sort of consolidate that. And that all happened within a matter of a week or two. But
wow.
the reality is we were able to act pretty quickly because we had these capital accounts with dollars in them to physically spend. Were we to have to get authority, the city administrator and myself as director have some authority to initiate emergency purchase orders to take action and go to council after the fact. And so that tool can be used. But yeah, everything takes a little bit of process to go through council, a week or two to get it in front of them.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. So the airport and the wastewater departments, who are also enterprise, are not subject to the same part of the municipal code for the preservation fund?
No, Chair Stedman, they are. So there is a provision in the code that enterprise funds shall maintain a capital reserve. And it describes that out quite clearly as either 5% of their assets or the 3-year future-looking average of what they're going to spend on capital. That is what the other enterprise funds do. Oddly, we met that capital fund requirement by creating the Harbor Preservation Fund and tied it from 2 million to 5 million. So we were kind of the outlier when we were compared to other enterprise funds on how they manage their capital. So what finance is really suggesting, it sounds odd eliminating the Harbor Preservation Fund, but the end result is we're really just changing the name to a capital reserve and following the city guidelines of tying it to our 3-year look ahead of what we're going to spend on capital.
Okay, so it sounds like we're trying to align to what already exists.
Yes, correct.
And Mr. DiMartini's point on that?
Yep, he's point on this, yep.
Okay. It's a little confusing. I've had to listen to it several times just to get my head around it, but. thank
Yeah,
you.
no, understandable. The clearest thing is it is a pot of money set specifically to fund our capital program. So tying it to the next 3 years of what we're planning to spend is very logical. It's kind of it's the actual amount of money we're going to need to enact our capital plan looking forward. So as opposed to it being an arbitrary $2 to $5 million, it really allows us to be a little bit more exact with what we're planning to spend on capital and then budgeting to have those dollars on hand.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner McCray.
So I have a comment here. I'm just hopeful that in this switch of process, change of name, and opening it up so that we're not tied to a specific dollar number, we are still able to have contractors be willing to act as quickly as they have for us in the past, and that they will step right up and start acting so that we can limit damage as it's occurring.
Commissioner McCray, that is correct. Yeah, the process itself is not changing. So technically, yeah, we're just changing, we're not changing the name because we are eliminating this fund, but we already have this capital fund within our financial system for the waterfront department that we haven't been funding because we've been funding the Harbor Preservation Fund instead. So, and there was a reason many years back for this to be created, but now the way our financial process works with our reserves, it makes sense to just align with what the rest of the city is doing, and the process will not change. All the funds currently in the Harbor Preservation Fund will be rolled over into the Capital Project Fund.
And Commissioner, just to follow up, there'll be no change on the way we execute contracts, procure. This is really sort of an accounting operation behind the scenes within the financial department. From a contractor's point of view, or how we execute work or engage in actual work, we're changing nothing in our procurement process or how that works.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Very well. Let's move on to harbor operations.
Mr. Barrios has one more item.
Oh, I'm sorry.
on his-
Go
No,
right
no
ahead,
problem.
Caesar.
Chair Stedman, Commissioners, yeah, this is the second part of my business report, and it's just a brief update on the Santa Barbara Landing renovations. On that regard, to provide you some background, for the past 27 years, 301 West Cabrillo Boulevard has served as the focal point of ocean adventures on the Central Coast, offering multiple large-scale dive boats, whale watching, charter services, jet ski rentals, kayak rentals, and a daily sports fishing operation. As you can see here, as part of the remodel process, that's the conceptual new building that's being proposed. And as you can see, there is a On the south side of the building, there's a deck that will accommodate the public. They will be able to grab a snack or a drink, coffee perhaps. And then also the center, on the west side of the building, the door where your door currently sits, that's moving to the north side. And as I move into this presentation, you'll see additional details. Yeah, for the past 27 years, this location has served and provided a multiple range of services to the ocean-minded community. But in 2021, after undergoing a comprehensive request for proposal RFP process, the Santa Barbara Landing LLC was selected by the city as the most responsive and most responsible proposer, whose experience and qualifications correspond best with the local coastal program and the waterfront department's interests. Subsequently, the Harbor Commission recommended this selection to the City Council for final approval. And then in August 2022, as part of their proposed business plan, Santa Barbara Landing LLC and partners presented to the Waterfront Department and the City Planning Division conceptual drawings and vision of this location, which includes a proposal for a new building design, as you recently saw, floating dock space, added services to enhance the use of their space in general, interior, exterior, with a keen understanding of the site as well as the community needs. So here are the summarized list of improvements being proposed as part of this project. There's a 233 square foot addition to the existing 941 square foot interior building, a full interior remodel and redesign, removal of the office spaces to create more retail space within the building, and a new beverage and food service area that will serve customers inside and outside of the building, which it'll be a new walk-up window on the east side of the building. And then they're increasing their exterior deck by approximately 275 square feet to accommodate seating. They're removing 561 square feet of existing accessory buildings located on the floating dock, and they're going to install a 713 square foot new storage space with a small office area. So technically, they're moving part of their main office to the docks down below. So this is one of the features that we are very excited about and to see. So on the left, you see the existing building, and which is covered with utility and closets, and it's basically a space that is not used. And then on the right, you have the proposed renovation, a new walk-up concession window for beverages and food sales. So this addition will open up the area and provide much needed activity to that side of the building and the overall area in general. I mean, we have a very wide sidewalk that's, I would consider, underutilized. So we're hoping this feature alone will bring additional life to the space, in addition that will complement the new interior design. And on that, here's a conceptual model of the interior of the building, which includes the removal of some office spaces to create that retail space you see here, and also to accommodate the beverage and food service area. And there are new doors on the south side of the building, which will really open up the space, as you can see here, facing our beautiful harbor. As far as timeline and process, moving forward, there are still several steps that the owners and their planning, architects, and construction experts have to go through. The latest was the ABR meeting on August 7th, where the project architect was given positive feedback from board members pertaining to the type of roof, the type of siding materials being used, as well as the discussion of adding small planters around the building to enhance the beauty of the area. So to wrap up this brief presentation, I would like to emphasize that this remodel will really enhance in the visitor experience for this area of the waterfront. It will bring a fresh look, and we're hoping it will boost the local economy of the harbor. And we're in support, and we're working closely with both planning and also with the business partners to get this done. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions. And I'm sorry, just to add my last section here, the projected completion will be spring 2025. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the commission? Okay, I have a question. Will this require any sort of restaurant permit for that additional deck that you were showing?
They already have that in place. It's part of their lease. So it's primarily coffee and small beverages. It's not full. You're not getting breakfast or lunch or dinner per se. It's a snack bar.
Snack bar, okay. And one other question. The condition of the Los Baños children's pool, the structure that's left there, I mean, it's pretty decrepit at this point. How much impact do you think that has on this sort of improvement? If any at all?
Chair Stedman, are you referring to, this is a private project, and the pool will be a city-funded project?
Well, of course, but right now that city pool is not, I mean,
That's
if
correct.
you're a visitor to Santa Barbara, you walk by that, and then the next thing you see, if you're walking to the south, is this great, improved facility with a new window to the sidewalk, and, it looks fabulous. Is there any line of sight on what might happen to the pool?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've been in contact with Parks and on updates on this pool. So it was planned to be redone into like a splash play area for kids, and then COVID happened, and then funds had to be allocated to other projects. As of 60 days ago or 2 months, there's no. It's to be determined, basically. We have not received any updates on this. Director Wilshire has.
Yeah, Chair, it's a tough space. It's parks. It's not waterfront, and so
Right.
it's zoned as a park. So it really is their space. There's some issues with the trees there and the birds nesting, so what they can put there and what can go there, and so there has been a lot of back and forth. But they went as far as having pretty well laid out plans for sort of a kids splash playground and something that would be, I mean, really anything would be more desirable than what's there now. But yeah, no major plans in the near future.
Right. Just a question. Is there any public comment? No public comment? Okay. Very well. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip over you, Caesar. Now we'll move on to item number 5.
And Chair Stedman, Commissioners, I believe you all know her, but Jeanette Prusinski will be presenting tonight in her new role.
Hello, Commissioners. Jeanette Prusinski here, Acting Harbor Operations Manager, and I'm also the Administrative Supervisor. So tonight, I have the Harbor Operations Report here. And first, I'm going to cover 2 events, and then I'm going to have the commercial fishing policy to talk about. So starting with 4th of July, as you can imagine, 4th of July festivities along the waterfront area is an all-hands-on-deck operation. Multiple departments collaborate with the waterfront department to host activities during this holiday, including Parks and Rec, Public Works, and Police and Fire. Sincere thanks to all who worked hard to put on this great event, including waterfront parking, facilities, and Harbor Patrol, who were all here working through the end of the event. Harbor Patrol participated in Operation Dry Water, beginning the weekend prior to the 4th of July. This is a national campaign for law enforcement agencies that places heightened focus on preventing boating under the influence. It's worth noting that Harbor Patrol observed no significant events during the 4th of July holiday, and notably, there were no boating under the influence arrests, which is a significant achievement. So the next event would be the Santa Barbara to King Harbor Race. Before I move on to that one, are there any questions about 4th of July? Yeah, okay. Santa Barbara to King Harbor Race, King Harbor and Redondo. This was the 50th anniversary of the running of the race, which is a big milestone. It was celebrated with Mayor Rouse, who delivered an official proclamation and cannon blast to kick off the race at noon on Friday, July 28. This year, there was an addition of the YB Race Tracker, which is a GPS unit that transmits positions through this app, allowing for real-time visualization online. There were 85 registrants, and 10 of them were locals. The overall winner was Mark Serber with Vessel Breiben at 19 hours, 57 minutes, 10 seconds. And from our local fleet, Mr. Dirk Freeland with Vessel Full Send. He finished first in the ultralight displacement boat Class C category and 3rd overall. And I wanted to give a special acknowledgement to Andre Guillen. He's one of our harbor operations assistants. Maybe you've seen him at the front. 85 registrants, 10 were local, which means 75 boats we hosted in Marina One. If you see the image on the left there is a snapshot of through YB Race Tracker. And it's a handheld unit, so you can see the boats mostly within Marina One, but you can also see they were probably carrying them back and forth to the yacht club. So Andre does all of the slip assignments for the office, and he put in a lot of work strategizing where to put the boats. And so the image on the right is the kickoff of the race. Or maybe a little bit into it, since there's some already kind of far out. Any questions about the King Harbor race? Okay.
Now, can I have one?
Yes, Commissioner Nelson.
I'm curious, is anybody video segments of the race or certain aspects of the race?
Commissioner Nelson, I did reach out to Brad Schoppeter. He's the race director, and got a little narrative from him, but I didn't get a whole lot of images. I looked through Instagram, and so from Chandlery and Brad, I got these screenshots, but I don't have any race
No, 'cause it would be
action
great-
shots.
Given that, it'd be great to see
Yeah, right?
the takeoff, the start, and the finish, so.
Starting with the cannon blast.
Yeah, all of that. All
Yeah.
of that would be a great film. What does a winner win? What's the award? Is it a cup? Is it or just something in the yacht club that hangs on the wall?
I don't know, but I know there are big-time bragging rights
Yeah, I
for that. I don't know what I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
thanks.
Okay.
Well, I have a question. Will
Yes, sir.
Angela be using a drone at all in her position or new position?
That's a good question, Chair Stebbin. Chris Bell was the keeper of, that was kind of his technology, so she is more than eager to get her drone pilot's license, but as of now, no. But we'll try and get her there.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, next in my report here is the commercial fishing slip policy overview. Okay, so there are two policies that regulate slip use for qualified fishermen who own and operate qualified fishing vessels. Resolution 14-023 is the current policy that regulates the designated commercial fishing slip permits. These are the month-to-month slip permits. 23078 is the city's rate and fee resolution, actually, and Section 6 covers visitor vessel fees, which has a special carve-out for visiting fishermen. Okay, so the first one I'm going to cover here is 14023, which is the month-to-month slip permits. Okay, so there are 45 designated commercial fishing slips. We've got the areas, Fish Float North, there are 11, Fish Float South, there are 13, Marina One A Finger has 18, and then there are 3 outliers. And here they are on a map. So as you can see here on our image, here is Fish Float North. This is Fish Float South, Marina One A Finger, and then the 3 outliers. We've got a person on O Finger, on R Finger in Marina One, and a person in Marina 4B Finger. All right, so within this policy, there is a biannual requirement. This is the root of the policy. The policy, there are 2 main purposes of it. One is to make sure that the individuals who hold slip permits within the designated areas continually prove that they are fishing. And then it also regulates the transfer policy. So it assures that when an individual wants to transfer their slip permit to a new fisherman, that new fisherman is also a qualified fisherman with a qualified fishing boat. So there's a biannual requirement. So every 2 years, they are required to provide documentation, basically proving their qualifications. So with those requirements, they submit a copy of their valid Department of Fish and Wildlife licenses for both their vessel and for their person. For each person listed on the slip permit must have a fishing license. And then also every 2 years, they need to provide proof of fishing income. And that's the amount of $15,000 for every 2 years. Okay. There is flexibility with the earnings requirement. So there is an option within the policy that allows them to split their earnings. So of the $15,000 requirement, half or a minimum of $7,500 has to come from the boat that is assigned to their slip. The other half, or minimum of $7,500, can come from their employment aboard another fishing boat. There is another option, a leasing option. So once a commercial fishing slip permittee has completed 3 earnings, which takes 6 years, once they've completed 3 earnings periods, then they can lease out their boat to another qualified fisherman. That fisherman's earnings have to meet the $15,000 threshold, but that lessee can contribute to their earnings. Okay, a little bit more about earnings. So we accept, within the policy, it allows a variety of acceptable fishing earnings. The vast majority is fishing. So one option is the Department of Fishing and Wildlife report on their earnings. We also would accept aquaculture receipts that would indicate the value of the product. And the policy also supports those who engage in fisheries research or activities. But it does stipulate, though, that they would need to get pre-authorization from the waterfront in order to make sure that that research or activity falls within fishing, and that their reportable income method is acceptable. Lastly, on the bullet points here, this is in respect to people with the split earnings. So if somebody fishes another boat elsewhere, then they can provide their paychecks plus a 1099 or W-2. And then there are exceptions. So there are certain circumstances that would limit a person from fishing and therefore, having an issue here. So with there are some exceptions in certain circumstances. So if there was a fishery closure, a natural disaster, a fishing vessel casualty, and medical and family emergencies, they could apply for an extension, and the extension, we are allowed to give up to 1 year of an extension. Okay, that ends that element of the fishing policy. The next element would be the visitor fishing slip policy. So before I move on to that, do you have any questions? Okay, great. Okay, next is the policy on the visitor slip use for fishermen. Resolution 23078, like I said a few minutes ago, is the rate and fee resolution. So the department has visitor slips that are offered to transient boaters on a first come, first served basis. They pay a nightly rate based on the length of their boat and the length of their stay. And this chart here shows that for pleasure craft, there's a price point change at 65 feet. So the nightly rate for vessels shorter than 65 feet is $1.75 per foot per night. Oversized boats, we call them 65 feet, and longer are $2.50 per foot per night. And for the pleasure craft, the rate doubles after the first 14 nights. So first 2 weeks, one rate, next 2 weeks, it's double. For commercial fishermen, we charge $1 per foot per night, and they turn in 2 fish tickets every 2 weeks. And as long as they are turning in 2 fish tickets every 2 weeks, they can continue paying $1 per foot per night for an unlimited basis, as long as they continue to fish. Now, weather does affect a fisherman's ability to fish, and if a fisherman is on a nightly rate and they need to turn in fish tickets every 2 weeks, weather definitely plays a part. If a fisherman does not turn in the 2 fish tickets every 2 weeks, then they default to the standard rate, and the rate goes up significantly. So what we do, this is actually not in the written policy, this is a special consideration for them, is during small craft advisories, and this is a screenshot of NOAA's weather website. In the green area here, this is inner waters. If there is a small craft advisory or worse for inner waters, then we give them the courtesy of continuing them on the fishing rate until they can go back out fishing. When the small craft advisories lift, then we kind of hope and expect that they would go back out and fish. That is it for the visitor policy. Are there any questions at all? I expected some.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's pretty clear.
okay. Maybe there's public comment or something?
Yes,
I was expecting a robust conversation. I'm prepared. I
Yes.
have some extra notes just in case.
I think we have some public comment.
Okay,
Yes, we have one speaker, Chris Voss.
okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Chris Voss. Thank you, Jeanette, for that presentation. I'd like to start by thanking the Harbor Department for constructing a policy that over the years has been able to preserve a strong fishing fleet in this port. And then I'd like to comment on the fact that in the more recent past, we've seen an increase in fishing activity in this port. And there's been a historic commitment for a pretty large number of slips. Up to 19% was originally considered for dedication to commercial fishing activities in the port. That is not very realistic in this day and age, given the number of constraints that have been put on fisheries to pursue sustainable fisheries objectives. But that said, we're seeing a lot of these policies being reversed. At the federal level, they're opening up areas that have been closed because the groundfish populations have recovered in a much faster rate than before, as well as an influx of lobster fishermen into our area from the south. So we're seeing increased fishing demand for slips, believe it or not, which is a novel situation, given that we had 45 slips designated originally or existing today that are dedicated for commercial fishermen. That represents about 4% of the slips that are available. And so, given that things have evolved in the way they have, there is an increased need for commercial fishing slips. There are a number, like a large number of commercial fishermen that are in recreational slips, and they pay the recreational rates. This 45 is set aside for, to preserve the fishing activity within the port by giving a benefit to the fishing community. The hope is that at the very least we could extend a financial benefit to the recreational fleet, or not the recreational fleet, the commercial fleet that is in visitor slips. Because even at that $1 a foot, if you're a consistent, sorry for the over the time, if you're a consistent commercial fisherman, you have a 30-foot boat, you're going to be at $900 a month, right? And so even though that seems like a benefit, it's still an exceedingly high rate for a commercial fisherman to bear if he's in a visitor slip. So that's what I'm getting at. The visitor slips are $900 a month for a 30-foot boat, which is high for a guy that's, trying to survive in the industry. But I do want to, again, commend the department for crafting a policy that has made it possible for an industry that has wild fluctuation, right? We make it big some years, and then we struggle other years. It's just like farming. And so for that reason, the policy needs to be kind of generous in allowing guys to survive in an industry that's unpredictable. So for that reason, thank you very, very much for the way it sits now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Commissioner McCray?
Chris, before you go away, I have a question for you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So we've discussed this before, and there was some discussion about kind of winnowing through who qualifies on the basis of that dollar amount. And once again, we're on a fixed dollar amount and times have changed, and we just want to make sure that our commercial fishermen who are taking advantage of this are the real commercial fishermen, not somebody who just, dabbles and is not really dependent on the commercial fishery for their primary income. And there was some mention of increasing that qualifying amount. It works out to about $7,500 a year, and you can split that between the boat that you actually are having in the slip and other activities. And it's fairly complex, but we just heard a really good description of it. What's your sense with respect to that, increasing that qualifying amount to be in those slips that would potentially open up some commercial fishing slips in the harbor that are currently tenanted by people that actually don't fish?
Right. So to get at that challenge and understand that we've been talking about this amongst ourselves, there's a certain amount of fishermen that are anxious to get into subsidized slips and feel as though that benefit, that privilege, that incentive isn't being utilized, as you described, appropriately by those. But I think the Harbor Department has done a good job in trying to transition those inactive fishing vessels that are in commercial slips out of those in a compassionate way, in a reasonable way that is crafted to get someone that is younger, aggressively pursuing a career in fishing. So I think that they've done a good job to date in handling that touchy dynamic. Despite the fact that that number's low, it's still a bar that guys have to get over, the dollar amount. And I think it's adequate. I suppose it could be raised, but I don't know if that's ultimately gets at the objective is to make sure that these subsidized slips aren't abused. They aren't being used by individuals that aren't fishing commercially. And I think that the harbor does a good job of getting at that. We're only talking 45 slips here, and if we were to go through every single one of them, I think right now you'd see a little to no abuse, Merritt. So I think there's an active effort to make sure that that doesn't happen, and I believe that they're doing a good job of it.
Thank you, Mr. Voss.
Commissioner Nelson?
I would just like to remind the commission and members of the work group, the commercial fishing work group, that we had a unanimous vote that the department consider a greater allocation of commercial designated slips. And we still await an answer as to whether or not they will in fact conduct that analysis as recommended by the committee in its report for which we voted on. Commissioner McCray and Commissioner Cohen wanted to be sure that we weren't forcing a major assignment at an inopportune time. So it was May when that vote was taken, so I guess we're hoping that we'll get an answer as to whether or not you will do the analysis that we recommended in the next, 30 days, September, or what have you. So.
Director Wiltshire?
Oh, is that a question? Yeah. No, and Commissioner Nelson, to your point, this is part of that. And so we kind of started with one potential outcome of a big ask. It was pretty clear at the last Harbor Commission that some sort of baseline understanding of our current policy. And so a big request like that, just like we do with any other policy changes or directing staff or getting people to go in these big work efforts, we want to kind of get all the pieces together. You were involved with the slip assignment policy process. It was a year and a half long. We exposed a lot of big information. We kind of started at the ground and worked through it. So it's easy to kind of assume where this would go, but we want to kind of do the work and bring you all along.
Well, you should tell us that. you should advise the work group that you are doing the first phase of your response. I mean, we didn't say change the policy. What we said is, what would it take to, what analysis that would look at the situation and make a determination whether it was possible to provide for more slips. And if this is part of that, great, because as you saw tonight, everybody agrees that the way it's being administered is great. It's just, it's been 45 slips for 50 years. And all we're saying is it possible to increase the number of slips, and you do the analysis. So I'm glad that this was the first part of it. And I'm assuming that that means you will, in fact, do the second part, is to do an analysis as to why it can't happen or under what circumstances it could happen.
Yeah, I know this is more, this is definitely a part of that. And
That's
so
great.
that is what we do. And it is, as you can imagine, there's more to that request than you'd think. And it's like, all of this stuff comes up of kind of cleaning up the house and revising the policy to right-size the amount of slips there are. If there's people in existing slips, maybe we don't need more slips. And so we're unclear on the supply-demand side.
Again, that's great. I'm glad to hear that you've begun the process. We're glad to hear that, and I'm glad that Jeanette is going to be doing it, because John and I got quite a lecture from Jeanette that was very informative about what the existing, the status quo is and what those policies are. So thank you, and I'm glad we're working forward to address the aspect of a greater allocation of commercial slips. Thanks.
And Commissioner Nelson, Chair Stedman, if I could just elaborate a little bit more on what's on my mind in that direction. And just for maybe hopefully clarification purposes, Mr. Voss touched on this, that these slips are essentially preserved for commercial fishermen. We're a full harbor. And so we also have a demand for regular slips, and anybody, even a commercial fisherman, still has the option to transfer into a regular 35-foot slip. And I realize that there is the price point, and I respect that, you know, from a person who wants to move their asset here for business purpose, but that's still an option. And there is a very high demand for the rest of the slips. So with the thought of freeing up slips when there's a full pool, you know, my mind kind of goes to the challenge of that, and you know, that we're a full pool, but those are people who have contracts with slip permits with us. Just felt that needed to be mentioned.
I certainly understand that, but like everything else, it's about priorities and how we do things. And all I know is the city council made a very strong statement to this commission that they wanted to promote the local seafood industry. They saw an opportunity there for economic growth that would help diversify the city's economy. And so what I tried to do during the presentation was to show the public policy that supports the ask. We're not saying do it. We're just saying, what would it take to do it, given the fact that the city council has expressed a desire to do more. So I clearly understand juggling, finding additional spots. But there was a time when there was a master plan, and the master plan for the harbor said, let's try to achieve 18%. And we know, we completely know that 19% is impossible and unreasonable. Everybody knows that. But what we're asking, is it possible for some increase? Given the fact that everybody thought that ratio of 19 to 91%, 81% was a good idea, can't we at least do that? Can't we try? What would it take to get there? That's all I'm saying, and I'm certainly not saying that it's not going to be a challenge. But what we're asking is, what is that challenge? What would you have to overcome to make another slip available? That's all. So thank you.
Are there any further questions or public comment?
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. All right, let's move on to Harbor Commission matters.
Item 6, election of chairperson and vice chairperson. Recommendation: the Harbor Commission nominate and elect the Harbor Commission chairperson and vice chairperson for fiscal year 2023 to 2024 per the City Charter Section 804 and the Board of Harbor Commission rules adopted September 16, 2010.
Thank you very much. All right, are there any motions? Commissioner Nelson?
Yes, I have a motion, but first I'd like to ask, what the citations you did of Harbor Commission policy, was there a reason why we had to vote tonight and we couldn't include our new members? Because it would have been nice to have a full complement here, and if it's as easy as just pushing a date to when they can be here, that would be an awfully good thing from my perspective, particularly since it's both our women, and they are the new members, and so I feel that the optics are bad for us to go forward, but I'm prepared to make a motion. I'm just curious why it wasn't possible for us to wait till we had full attendance.
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson, good question. It is a bummer we're down two, but per Santa Barbara Charter, it's called out for charter boards and commissions to elect a vice chair and chair as close to July 1st, the meeting that is as close to July 1st as possible. So it was kind of hard to predict that we were going to be down two members. We didn't know that until 2 weeks ago, but we're following charter direction.
That answered my question. It's just because we were taking, a remote testimony for general public, and I was wondering if we were able to have at least taken remote from the two absent members if they were available, even if they were in other locations. But given what you just said, you answer my questions. So now I'm prepared to make a motion. I think this year we took a couple of bold steps, maybe 3 bold steps. We decided that we wanted to strengthen and acknowledge the importance of our standing committees, now work groups. And in fact, we even restructured the agenda to make sure that that was placed at a higher location on that. Secondly, we decided that we wanted to establish priorities. And third, we wanted to exercise some control over our agendas before they were published. And we have made good steps, I believe, under John Stedman's stewardship as chair along those lines. But I must admit, and this has been a very nice meeting, but I must admit, at the last meeting, the department's insistence to bring items that were the principal subject of our work groups without including the work group was very disconcerting to me because the whole nature of this is that it seemed to me that the executive branch was trying to establish the fact that we make the policy, not you. And therefore, we don't have to cooperate. We don't have to collaborate with you guys. We can just do it. And to put those items on the agenda made me feel that that was what was happening. So to protect the ground we've made, the importance of the committees, I'm looking at Seth down there, there would not have been a cruise ship committee were it not for the former Commissioner Michael Hanrahan and Betsy Kramer. And so I think the integration of the Harbor Commission in the policy making is critical. And I sense that the administration is moving to marginalize that. So therefore, I would like to, and I guess I can't make a motion for both the chair and the vice chair, but I want business as usual. So my nomination would be for John Stedman to continue to be the chair, and that Adam Stanwyck continue to be the vice chair. That's my motion.
I will second that.
Okay, very well.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Nelson, seconded by Commissioner McCray, to have Chair Stedman remain as chairperson and Commissioner Stanwyck as vice chairperson. Commissioner McCray?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanwyck?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Chair Stedman?
Yes.
Motion is unanimous.
All right, that was much simpler than I anticipated. I will say this, I'll make a comment. Thank you very much, Commissioner Nelson. I believe for people that have been working with this commission over the years, including everybody sitting up here, Adam and I changed the model a bit this last year. So I really do consider him co-chair, in effect. So he's been there for every one of the agenda reviews for the past 12 months. He's familiar with all the procedures of running a meeting. So I might miss a meeting this year going forward, right? I have not, I think I've missed one meeting in 6.5 years. So you would all be in capable hands.
I'll just say one more bit on that too. And obviously as a relatively new member, having John on the cruise ship committee, which is the one that I've spent the most effort on, has been invaluable, just having his experience of being on so many committees. It's a natural person to bounce some ideas off and understand if you're doing things in the generally right direction. And having Adam here as the vice has been awesome. He's been adding lots of, I always look forward to his insights and his comments, and I'm happy to see the kind of the leadership stay the same, but continue to move forward. So thanks to you both.
Vice Chair.
Yes, I just wanted to, just thank John Stedman for this year as chair. I know I learned a lot under him, and I really appreciate his giving more credence to the vice chair role, as well as just, being really helpful to just be under your tutelage for this past year. Echoing Commissioner Nelson's comments, I thought we got a lot of stuff done this year in terms of changing the agenda, the work groups, and making positive changes to the commission going forward, which I think will be helpful. So, thanks, Chair Stedman.
Commissioner McCray?
Thank you. First, I want to ask if we've actually done our work here and whether or not we actually have to vote separately for the vice chair.
I think because it was unanimous, I think you're okay, but if we want to cover ourselves, we may as well vote for this vice chair so we don't have to come back and do it again.
That's a great question.
Then I should make a motion for Adam Stanwyck to be the vice chair.
And I will second.
Okay. And Commissioner McCray?
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Stanwyck?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson? Yes. Chair Stedman?
Aye.
Motion is unanimous.
Commissioner McCray?
Well, that's great. We've had a great year here, and I think our guiding lights have done a great job. I like the changes in the agenda that you two have implemented, and the way that you've done them. It's been very effective to hear those committee reports come up first. It's nice that way. And I actually have quite a bit of experience before the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and they actually have 2 vice chairs, and they split the task behind the gavel. So you don't actually have to be missing to be able to pass the gavel off for an agenda item or 2.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to, unless there are any other further comments, let's move on to commission and staff communications. Commissioner Nelson?
Yes, in the state of California established what is known as the California Economic Resiliency Fund, SURF. It's a $600 million program that can provide funding for infrastructure development, for economic development goals of the state of California. And they divided the state into 16 regions. And the region that Santa Barbara is involved in is called Uplift, is the Central Coast region that extends from Ventura to Santa Cruz. It's the big one. The Harbor Commission and the City Council have supported the establishment of a maritime collective, and the Harbor Commission met 2 months ago to endorse the project and its direction with Santa Barbara City College to have access to that fund pot. One of the things that we did was to participate in what is known as a listening session, which invited folks from various industries to express barriers to economic development, workforce development, and inclusion in the economic prosperity. And originally, we felt this was ideal just for commercial fishing and the goal of the Maritime Collective. But part of the goal of the Maritime Collective, as we all know, is the basic infrastructure needs of the commercial fleet. But the second aspect of the Maritime Collective was sort of what they call cross-sector collaboration between entrepreneurs in the blue economy and the maritime industry. And so when we convened our listening session, we didn't just invite commercial fishermen. We invited other important industries in the harbor or businesses in the harbor. And present for a very early morning meeting on a Monday, we were able to have Jamie Dimon representing the outfitters at Santa Barbara Landing. We were able to have Danny Castagnola and his tug services. We were able to have Ed Anderson, the famous legacy boat builder in town. We had Kim Selko, who's not only the CFSB executive director, but she also runs a community-supported fishing business. And of course, we had fishermen there in the name of Ray Kennedy. And we really had a great conversation that I believe totally impressed the conveners of our session. But as I thought about it, I recall that in the master plan, the old master plan, and particularly now, since we have no active master plan, it's the local coastal plan. And both of those documents have always included the primacy, the importance of a working harbor. And what we had assembled there at that meeting was, in fact, the components of a working harbor. And I came in contact with the city's general plan, and the general plan focuses on a working harbor. So while I'm delighted as chair of the Commercial Fisheries Group and a volunteer with CFSB that this commission has given the amount of time it has to commercial fishing in our commercial fleet, I think it's important to look at the other big contributors, the supply chain, the other contributors that rely on the harbor, that really comprise the working harbor. And so part of me wants to get together with the new chair and vice chair and talk about how do we do that? How do we focus on the other economic activities that are occurring at the harbor other than recreational boating and commercial fishing? I think we need to focus on what makes it a working harbor. Whether we have a work group or we just have someone from each of these industries speak every month or so at this time of the agenda is something that I've been kicking around, and I would like to talk to you guys about that because it really was sensational to see all of the players in the maritime economy who are headquartered here at the harbor talking about the workforce development issues that are so important to them. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Commissioner Nelson. Are there any other comments from the commission? Staff?
Yeah, Chair Stedman, Ms. Brzezinski was going to just update Harbor Commission and the public on the upcoming potential for a storm.
Right, Commissioner, so, right, Tropical Storm Hillary is now a hurricane. So we have been getting regular updates from, if you remember Stacy Rosenberger from a couple of months ago, she's the city's emergency services manager. So she's been tracking this and staying in communication with the Weather Service. And Nathan Aldridge here, Harbor Patrol Supervisor, has been watching the webinars as well. So as it is right now, of course, off the coast of Mexico, it could play out in, we'll see how it does play out. But what we're expecting right now is to experience some of the effects probably on Sunday. So today I sent out a Blackboard Connect message. That's the software that does the outreach, inviting our boat owners to come take a look at their lines and secure any hatches and things like that this weekend, before the storm. And the weekend staff will be ready to take in visitor boats, hopefully, from the anchorage and for people who are just passing through. These are during small craft advisories or worse, we typically fill up in slips, and that's when you'll see boats rafted off of walkways and things like that. But I just wanted to make you aware that we are aware and monitoring it as well. And Stacy, Ms. Rosenberger, says right now she's not planning on opening the EOC, but that is, those are the conversations that happen at the emergency services level when something is brewing off the coast. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner McCray.
I just want to comment that the tropical storms are quirky and squirrely because they can be quite narrowly focused at where their impacts are. And right now, we don't know whether we're going to get northeast or northwest or southeast winds out of this. And the only thing we really do know is that this thing is coming at us from an angle that pushes swell straight up and into the channel. So for those folks who have boats in the anchorage, it's going to be a lot of surge potentially, one way or another. If it comes with southeast, it will be even more worrisome. And I just think people need to keep a close eye on which way it goes. We have 3 different weather models right now that forecast out far enough to have a forecast for our area at that time. And they all have this thing coming at us a slightly different way. And those slight differences make big differences in the direction the wind flow comes and hits us.
I remember, speaking of Eric, the institutional knowledge of Eric, he basically described the last major storm event as historic in terms of the swell, and that the swell did the most damage in terms of closure. Is that characteristic of this storm, where you have, atmospheric rivers and cyclone bombs? Is that the nature of this?
Well, it's basically just coming straight up the coast, along the coast, and we don't know where it's going to come ashore. It falls apart when it comes ashore. But as it comes, it's going to be pushing swell. And it will come straight in between Anacapa and Hueneme and right into the Santa Barbara Channel and be coming from a direction that will, hit Santa Barbara relatively directly, which is something we just kind of rarely see. Usually it swells from just about every other direction, somehow to get buffered by islands or Point Conception or whatever. They have to make some pretty sharp turns. This one will come straight up. So we'll see.
Right, yeah, the models that we were looking at this afternoon, it looked like it was going to go right up and make landfall on the coast of Baja, and then kind of cut inland from there. So, of course, you know, people are looking at this constantly. But it looked like from the models that we were seeing today that we were going to get maybe kind of like the left side, whatever that part is called. Okay.
Right, and then in that case, if we get the left side, the wind will blow from the northwest.
Okay.
If we get the right side, the wind will be with that swell and will blow from the southeast. So we don't know, like 50 miles one way or another in the track could make that difference.
All right, are there any other communications? Is there a motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion for adjournment.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned.